And talk about this forecast in detail. Thanks for now, Hina. Subir Gokran is Director of Research at Brookings India and former Deputy Governor at the Reserve Bank of India. Dr. Gokran, thanks very much for your time, sir. Good morning, Prashant here. So the first forecast from the Met is for a deficient rainfall, sir. What is your reading of what has been put out?
Well, 95% deficit on the aggregate is not a particularly worrying indicator. In any case, the aggregate number is far less important than the distribution both across space and over time. And we don't get forecasts that give us a sense of what the shortfall, if any, is going to be in the critical months of July and August. So if the entire shortfall is in June or September, it doesn't do very much damage, in fact hardly any damage at all to the agricultural system. But if there's a concentration of the shortfall in July particularly, and to some extent in August, then the damage could be much more significant. So I think this is a very broad indication that there may be some problem. If you compare the first forecast with actual outcomes, there isn't much correlation between them. There are years in which the forecast has been for below normal and the actual monsoon has been above normal. So I think it's too early to start worrying about it. But obviously it is one more factor which the new government is going to have to take into account as it charts out its first actions.
Right. 60% chance of a El Nino. We've all kind of become El Nino experts now on the lighter side. But what is your sense? And also this fact that, first forecast, I would have imagined they will always say, well, it's going to be a normal monsoon. But here they're saying, I think they must have they must have seen what other Met departments around the world have also done, right? So should we pay attention, or you're still saying it's too early?
It is a model.
It doesn't really tell us very much.
The model takes into account. No, what I'm saying is that the first forecast is based on 8 variables, and it generates an outcome, and you have to report that. You can't be, couching it. But then the June forecast is something that takes into account the developments in 2 other variables between now and June. And that leads to a much more, I would say, accurate picture. So 95% to me is, in the first forecast, not in itself a matter of concern. But I also want to emphasize that forecasts at this point are not terribly accurate. So you could get a perfectly normal monsoon, or you could get an even more deficient monsoon. And I think that's something you always have to be prepared for, and this forecast is just nudging you a little bit in that direction, saying maybe there could be a problem. So don't get caught unawares, and I think that's an important message.
Non-agri GDP, the expectation is non-agri GDP will improve anyway, right? From here, but inflation and the RBI policy will be important with this monsoon forecast. What's your sense, sir? How does it play from here?
I think the monetary policy response will not be to the forecast. It will be to the actual playing out of food inflation. Whether a monsoon pattern triggers or reinforces food inflationary pressures, or something else does, is entirely, is only going to be known as the process plays itself out. So the forecast itself is, I think, it's just an indication at this point. We have to wait for the June forecast, and more importantly, we have to look at how rainfall the monsoon is playing out in July. If we have a bad or inadequate precipitation in July, then I think the prospects for food inflation intensify considerably, and that's when I think the monetary policy process starts to or should start to kick in figuring out whether this is going to be a more permanent, prolonged problem, or is it going to be just a sort of short-lived phenomenon. But July rainfall, in my experience, is the most critical factor in this whole process. And there is really no forecast for July. There's no long-term forecast or advanced forecast for rainfall in July. We have 95% for the whole monsoon. But the whole monsoon is not uniformly important for agriculture. It is July and August rainfall that is critical for agriculture.
Fair enough. I mean, I think, economists on the sell side, brokers, etc., they're building in about a 3% agri growth in fiscal 15. So it could go I mean, it could really be anything, right? I mean, we don't know at this stage. We just have to wait it out.
Yeah, well, also keep in mind that the Rabi, which is the winter crop, is now almost half of the total agricultural output. So even the monsoons are sort of slightly on the lower side, and the impact isn't all that much. The monsoon doesn't obviously have a direct impact on the winter crop. It does have some bearing on groundwater, supplies, but not directly on the crop itself. And so, I mean, we've got to be a little careful about jumping to conclusions based on this advanced forecast here.
Right. Dr. Gokran, financial markets have been doing very well. The rupee, though, has recently come under a bit of pressure, but generally speaking, markets have done quite well. Some say, well, it's merely being in line with what other markets have done, be it the BRIC bunch or, what came to be known as the Fragile Five or whatever. You take any comparison and, well, they've done very well. But if you actually compare market performance from the date when Mr. Narendra Modi was anointed as the BJP PM candidate in September 2013, India comes right on top. I mean, you can compare the market with any other market. So my question is, are generally speaking expectations running too high in your assessment about growth revival?
Well, I think, you can take any view on whether expectations are running too high. I think ultimately it's a matter of delivery. It's a matter of execution. Whatever government comes into office, whatever it promises in terms of immediate steps to address the economic slowdown and the other pressure points on the economy, people are going to give it some time. There is going to be a honeymoon period, particularly if it's a stable government which promises to last a full term. And as these promises start to be delivered upon, then this positive feeling is going to be reinforced. But if the government itself is unstable or it shows early signs of not being able to deliver on its commitments, I think the pessimism, the cynicism will set in very quickly. So what this is doing essentially, and that may be a positive thing in one sense, is that it is putting that much more pressure on the new government to start to get its act together very quickly. And that can only be good for the economy. The minute there is a perception that this is not going to happen, then you could see a very quick reversal, and the rupee will come under pressure, markets will come under pressure as the money that came from outside starts to return. So there is a huge burden of responsibility here, and I think the new government, whoever is making the economic policy and implementing the decisions made, is going to be under intense scrutiny and enormous pressure to start acting very quickly. Now, in other countries, some of them are also on the threshold, if not immediately, over the next few months of political changes. And there again, I think the expectations in countries that have not been showing very strong growth or dealing with other macroeconomic problems, the expectation of change and the expectation that new government will use the opportunity of a relatively adverse economic situation to push through some far-reaching, some very positive changes, which we also saw in our own case, certainly in 1991. I think that does drive expectations, that does drive valuations also, and that is, I think, partly explaining why these markets, by and large, are doing very well. But as I said, expectations can turn on a dime. They can reverse very quickly. and governments have to be very, very wary of this happening, because it's very difficult then to stem the tide, and that's an experience that's something we've experienced ourselves not that long ago. It is rather difficult to manage.
Mr. Gokran, on earlier occasion when you've been on this show, we've discussed the basic structural issues which need fixing, right? And what you would focus on. We've done that in detail. Let's just talk about the first, say, I've seen a couple of open letters to the new Prime Minister saying, well, what the agenda should be. I mean, from economists, from editors and all of that. I just want to ask you, what do you think because you said, well, this new government will have a huge burden of expectations on it, right? Everything will be closely scrutinized. What would you like to see in the first couple of weeks from the new government?
Well, I would like to see some very, very, serious, comprehensive efforts to address three basic problems. They will not yield results immediately, but they have to be tackled if we are going to, set ourselves back on a sustainable growth trajectory. We have to address the agricultural issue, which of course will get complicated by a monsoon problem if it happens. We've got to get the food inflation problem under control, and that is not going to happen, without, I think, very, very significant structural issues. I'm really comparing the situation now with the kind of situation we had in the late 60s. There we came out with a very, very effective mixed, there were lots of negatives about it also, but broadly it did take the country from high dependence on imported food grains to self-sufficiency in a relatively short period of time. I think that's the kind of focus and urgency that we need on food. Not rice and wheat anymore, but other things that are causing inflationary problems. The second is infrastructure. I think we've really fallen behind on infrastructure. The PPP model was promising, and of course there have been some successes from this approach, but too few, and the overall condition of infrastructure is, I think, very, very worrying. There are contractual issues, there are implementation issues, there are financial issues, there are all kinds of issues which really only the government can fix, and that is something that has to be done with very, very high priority and urgency. And the third is employment. I think we are really risking a major political backlash if we keep talking about so many million first-time voters and the youth of the country, forward-looking, the future. But this is not going to, this constituency is not going to be satisfied with no jobs. They're going to be looking for employment of all kinds, reasonable career prospects and so on, and that's not happening. So that is a huge, huge priority as well.
And do you think the manifesto which has been put out by the BJP has got enough material which makes you confident that some of the things, the three things that you put out, would be addressed? Because, well, critics are saying they're trying to please all. They're basically promising the moon.
These issues, but the manifesto.
Yeah, go on, sir. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, that's what a manifesto is supposed to do. It is supposed to address every constituency that the party is interested in quoting. So there's no, I don't have any issues with the manifesto. The question is, what happens when the government is in power and the buck stops with it? And there, I think, is where the test is going to come. Can they prioritize? Can they get can they put absolutely intense focus on the 3 or 4 or 5, and my list is my list, other people have their own list, but they have to prioritize a set of issues which require not just the normal style of cabinet or ministerial functioning, but some sort of extra institutional energy and muscle, because these issues are multidimensional. They're not within the domain of just one department or ministry. They require enormous and intense coordination, and that is where I think our system has been repeatedly letting us down, that whenever it comes to cutting across or dealing with issues that cut across domains, across turfs, we struggle, we fumble. That is the big challenge, I think, because all of these problems have, if you look at it, have actually originated, have precipitated because of our inability to coordinate across multiple domains. And that's where the new government really is going to find itself extremely tested with extreme severity.
Got that, sir. Appreciate you joining in, Mr. Gokran. Thank you for your time, and it's always a pleasure hearing your views, sir. Thank you.